Have you ever felt like your arguments weren't taken seriously, or that in a discussion, the focus suddenly shifted to personal attacks rather than the topic itself? Or maybe, you found yourself using reasoning that felt solid but then crumbled when challenged? What you've encountered are logical fallacies. They're everywhere, in political debates, casual conversations, and even in our internal thoughts. But how do we better understand these logical pitfalls? Let's turn to some of the greatest philosophers and logicians for insight. In this video we'll explore what logical fallacies are, why they're so pervasive, and how to avoid them, all while drawing on the wisdom of thinkers like Aristotle, René Descartes, and Bertrand Russell.
What is a logical fallacy?
A logical fallacy is an error in reasoning that undermines the logic of an argument. While fallacies often seem convincing, they're deceptive because they lead to false conclusions. Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, is often credited with laying the foundation of logic as we understand it today. In his work Sophistical Refutations, he explored how flawed reasoning, particularly in rhetoric, could be used to deceive. Aristotle's work was crucial in identifying different types of fallacies and developing a system for logical reasoning. Aristotle famously said, "It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it." This idea underpins much of logical reasoning. Understanding an argument doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you must be able to analyze it critically to determine its validity. Logical fallacies exploit our natural inclinations to jump to conclusions, base our beliefs on emotions, or take mental shortcuts. Whether intentional or accidental, these errors derail sound reasoning and lead us astray.
Why do we fall for logical fallacies?
Before we dive into specific fallacies, it's worth reflecting on why we're so prone to them. The philosopher Francis Bacon offered a deep insight into this issue with his concept of idols of the mind in his Novum Organum. Bacon identified various types of mental distortions or idols that cloud human judgment. Among these idols are idols of the tribe, our inherent biases as humans, and idols of the cave, personal biases shaped by individual experience. These concepts align with how we're predisposed to certain fallacies, such as confirmation bias or emotional reasoning. Consider Bacon's warning: the human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, draws all things else to support and agree with it. This highlights how we often cling to our beliefs, even when confronted with contradictory evidence, which makes us susceptible to fallacies. Now that we've explored why we fall for logical fallacies, let's delve into some of the most common types and learn how to avoid them, using insights from the great thinkers of history.
Common types of logical fallacies.
Ad hominem, attacking the person. The ad hominem fallacy occurs when, instead of addressing the argument, someone attacks the character or motive of the person making the argument. This is one of the most pervasive fallacies, particularly in modern political and social discourse. The philosopher Immanuel Kant emphasized the importance of separating the argument from the individual making it. In his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant stresses that objective reasoning should be based on the merits of the argument, not the person presenting it. Engaging in personal attacks not only weakens the discussion but also distorts our ability to reach the truth. An example of this fallacy might sound like, "You can't trust her opinion on climate change, she's not a scientist." Here, the attack is on the individual's qualifications rather than the argument itself. Kant's work reminds us to act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. In other words, the focus should be on principles and reason, not personal attacks. Straw man misrepresentation of an argument. The straw man fallacy happens when someone distorts an opponent's argument to make it easier to attack. Instead of addressing the actual claim, they create a weaker, often exaggerated version, then proceed to defeat it. This fallacy misleads the audience, diverting attention from the real issue. One philosopher who critically examined the integrity of argumentation was John Stuart Mill. In his work on liberty, Mill argued for the importance of open debate and fair representation of opposing viewpoints. According to Mill, democracy and rational discourse depend on the honest engagement of ideas. Misrepresenting someone's argument not only undermines that discourse but also harms the pursuit of truth. An example of the straw man fallacy might sound like this. If someone argues for better regulation of corporate practices, an opponent might respond, "So, you think we should shut down all businesses?" This isn't what was argued, but the distortion makes the position easier to dismiss. Mill urged us to engage with the strongest version of the opposing argument, suggesting, "He who knows only his own side of the case, knows little of that." This reminds us that engaging with an argument fairly and without distortion strengthens our understanding and helps us avoid the straw man fallacy. Appeal to authority. The appeal to authority fallacy occurs when someone claims that a proposition must be true simply because an expert or authority figure endorses it, without considering the merits of the argument itself. While it's reasonable to trust experts in their fields, relying solely on authority without questioning the evidence is a logical misstep. René Descartes, in his Meditations on First Philosophy, highlighted the importance of doubting authority and relying on clear reasoning. Descartes famously stated, "I think, therefore I am," emphasizing the importance of individual critical thinking over blind trust in others. He argued that even the most well-regarded authorities can make mistakes, and that reason and evidence should always take precedence over mere claims of expertise. An example of this fallacy could be, "This must be true because a famous scientist said it." Descartes would remind us that even expert statements need to be critically evaluated rather than accepted blindly. False dilemma either/or fallacy. A false dilemma fallacy, also known as a false dichotomy, presents only two options or outcomes when in fact there are more. This fallacy forces people to choose between extremes, often ignoring more nuanced or moderate positions. This type of fallacy contradicts the teachings of Aristotle, who advocated for the golden mean in his Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle believed that virtue often lies between extremes and that we should avoid oversimplifying complex matters. In contrast to false dilemmas, Aristotle's approach encourages us to recognize that life's decisions often involve many possible choices, not just an either/or situation. For example, saying "you're either with us, or you're against us," ignores the possibility of neutrality or alternative positions. Aristotle's philosophy urges us to seek balance and explore all possibilities before making a decision. Slippery slope. The slippery slope fallacy occurs when someone argues that a small first step will inevitably lead to a chain of related events culminating in a significant, and usually negative, outcome, without providing evidence for that inevitability. While it's true that actions can have consequences, the slippery slope fallacy exaggerates the connection between them. David Hume, a key figure in empiricism, would challenge this type of argument. In his An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, Hume emphasized the importance of evidence and skepticism about causal claims. According to Hume, we should not assume that one event will necessarily lead to another without observing and proving the connection. For example, a slippery slope argument might sound like, "If we allow this small law change, soon all of our freedoms will be taken away." Hume's approach would be to ask for evidence of this causal chain and avoid assumptions based on fear or exaggeration. Circular reasoning. Circular reasoning occurs when the conclusion of an argument is used as one of its premises. Instead of providing evidence, the argument merely restates its initial claim in different words, creating a loop. Philosopher Bertrand Russell, in his book The Problems of Philosophy, criticized circular reasoning, explaining that valid arguments must be based on solid premises that stand independently of the conclusion. Russell emphasized that logic must move forward, not in circles, to avoid fallacies and promote real understanding. An example of circular reasoning would be, "You should trust him because he's trustworthy." The conclusion, "he's trustworthy," simply repeats the premise without offering any evidence to support the claim. Russell advocated for rigorous examination of premises. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. This highlights the need to question circular arguments and search for evidence beyond mere repetition. Hasty generalization. A hasty generalization fallacy occurs when a conclusion is drawn based on insufficient or non-representative evidence. This type of fallacy leads to broad conclusions that don't take all the facts into account. John Locke, one of the fathers of empiricism, in his essay concerning human understanding, emphasized the importance of gathering adequate and representative evidence before forming conclusions. Locke argued that sound reasoning depends on the careful accumulation of data and observations, warning against making assumptions based on limited information. An example of this fallacy might be, "I met two rude people from that city, so everyone there must be rude." Locke would remind us to avoid such sweeping judgments based on limited experience, insisting that knowledge comes from careful observation over time.
How to avoid logical fallacies in your own thinking.
Understanding these fallacies is one thing, but how do we ensure our own thinking is free of them? The great philosophers offer several strategies to help us think more critically. Practice skepticism. Descartes' method of doubt encourages us to question everything, especially our assumptions. By doubting even the most seemingly obvious truths, we are forced to evaluate our reasoning carefully. This doesn't mean rejecting all ideas, but rather subjecting them to rigorous scrutiny. Before accepting any claim, ask yourself, what evidence supports this? Descartes teaches us that only through methodical doubt can we arrive at clear and distinct truths. Embrace the middle ground. Aristotle's golden mean reminds us that truth often lies between extremes. When faced with a choice that seems to be an either/or scenario, ask yourself if there's a third option or even several. By avoiding extreme positions, we allow for more balanced, reasoned decision-making. For example, in a debate about public policy, look for compromises or nuanced positions instead of succumbing to polarized thinking. Gather adequate evidence. Both Locke and Hume stress the importance of evidence in reasoning. Before forming conclusions, make sure you've gathered enough information. Hume especially warns against making assumptions about causality without concrete proof, while Locke encourages thorough observation. When making decisions or evaluating arguments, ask yourself, do I have enough evidence to support this conclusion, or am I making assumptions based on limited information? Engage with the strongest version of the argument. John Stuart Mill emphasized the importance of fair debate and engagement with the strongest version of an opposing argument. Rather than attacking a weakened straw man version of someone's position, make an effort to understand it fully and address its strongest points. When you find yourself in disagreement, try to summarize the other side's argument as accurately and fairly as possible. This will not only make your own position stronger but will also promote more productive conversations.
Reflecting on logical fallacies in daily life.
Reflecting on how often we encounter logical fallacies in daily life can be a humbling experience. Whether in political debates, online discussions, or personal conversations, fallacies are everywhere. But by learning from philosophers like Aristotle, Descartes, Mill, Locke, and Hume, we can sharpen our reasoning skills and become more aware of these pitfalls. The next time you encounter an argument that feels off, ask yourself, is this a fallacy? Is there an emotional appeal overriding the logic? Are both sides of the argument being fairly represented? By questioning the reasoning behind the claims, you'll become a more critical thinker. Logical fallacies are deceptive but avoidable. By drawing on the insights of history's greatest philosophers, we can better navigate the world of arguments and reasoning. Aristotle taught us the importance of balance, Descartes encouraged skepticism, and Mill emphasized fair engagement. Each of these thinkers reminds us that critical thinking is a skill we must continually develop. Have you noticed any logical fallacies in your own life recently? Let us know, leave a comment below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe. And remember, this video was narrated by AI. If you found any mistake, we are sorry. Let us know about it by comment and we will fix it. Until next time, stay curious and think critically.